Hello everyone, and welcome back to Siberia, the frozen hellhole where in the last video, we achieved Stalin's 5-year plan at a cost of thousands dying due to unavoidable acts from God. Today, we're going to take this poverty-stricken, alcoholic-filled, decrepit city and turn it into a thriving republic, where everyone will have access to healthcare, education, and not losing their entire family every winter. Okay, I can't promise that last one. Basically, what I'm saying is, it's time for another 5-year plan. The goals are simple. Fix all the problems I swept under the rug in the last video, reach the arbitrary goal of 10,000 people, and finally, become rich. To give you all a quick reminder of what happened in the last video, we built a coal town, the price of coal then crashed, and everybody died because it got cold. We then repopulated, built an iron mine, and then the price of iron crashed. Finally, we built a steel mill, hit 5,000 population, and everything was perfect. Or so I told you. You see, at the end of last video, I did something we call in the business lying, as our little republic was far from perfect. You may be thinking, but James, you said in the last video you were making 70,000 rubles a month. Well, I'm ashamed to admit it, but I cooked the books. Okay? I'm sorry. By limiting our exports the month prior, I made the numbers spike to make things look better than they actually were. In reality, we were poor, our industries were highly inefficient because they were all clogged up with waste, and health was down the drain because everyone was a chronic alcoholic. So, our first objective of the second 5-year plan was to fix all the mistakes of the first one, starting with waste. My original strategy had been to keep building bins and worry about it later. Sadly, later had finally caught up with me, and all my buildings were clogged up with waste and unable to work. You may remember I had built a waste facility that was capable of some basic separation between the stuff we could and couldn't burn. But I had long abandoned it as it was unable to keep up with demand and was taking valuable workers away from my mines. Instead, I was exporting our waste via this single dump. The other must have burnt down at some point. So removing the waste wasn't a problem. It was the trucks that picked it up. Besides not having enough in general, the ones I had were outdated, slow, and completely shagged because I hadn't maintained them. First things first then was to modernize the fleet with some YAG 10s. Not that sort of YAG 10. These ones. Double the speed, an extra ton of capacity, and a shiny orange coat. I'd personally like to extend a big thank you to Comrade Stalin for this marvelous piece of engineering. After unleashing our new fleet, which may have caused a massive traffic jam, waste was somewhat under control, and the steel mill could operate without cutting out every couple of minutes, meaning we could move on to more important things, like health. Like most countries, I had just kind of ignored health in hopes that people would just die before they became a problem. Turns out this wasn't the best practice, as we didn't have enough people to work the steel mill. With health at an incredible 64%, one of the main reasons it was so low, aside from the cold, which was made worse by the power plant cutting out every 5 seconds because it wasn't receiving enough coal, was everybody's crippling alcoholism. Sitting at an eye-watering 76%, I needed to shift away from pubs being the only source of entertainment. I did have sports fields, but people didn't exactly want to play football when it was minus 40 outside, leaving our sports enjoyment at an incredibly low 14%. So, building a couple of sports halls, I gave them access to sports all year round, and to encourage people to turn up, I thought it'd be a great idea to build a pub next door. I, unfortunately was not prepared for unforeseen consequences. No, what are you doing? You're all going to the pub. You're meant to go to the sports center. That's not... What are you doing? Next on the list was to continue researching improvements to our healthcare, including increasing our birth rate, as I was sticking to the plan of outbreeding winter, which I would like to point out was currently failing. Finally, the last thing on the list was to remove the cursed block. I'm not really sure how I did this, but one apartment block had no access to water, and for some reason, people kept moving into it just to die, so I knocked it down. Unfortunately, our changes wouldn't have much effect in the short term, and by the end of winter, we had once again lost around 300 people. With another successful winter under our belts, it was time to fix our cash flow. To start with, I needed to repopulate the city with a fresh batch of workers so we could fuel our steel production. Realistically, the best thing to do would be to build another district, but I'm far too lazy to do that and just continued cramming in more houses around the station. With all the extra workers, the goal was to move away from exporting coal and focus primarily on our steel exports. I know some of you probably cringed when I said that because yes, I may have been exporting coal while not having enough coal for my power plants, which meant I was buying coal for my not so temporary plants, which was costing me more than my exports. Yeah, basically I'm an idiot. Anyway, I got to work with some tight construction, starting with a large block on the hill and this trio of apartments. With another 800 workers in town, things were moving in the right direction. So I unleashed a second steel train, ripped down the old waste plant, and was actually starting to make money. Like, for real this time, I'm not cooking the books. Our steps towards better health had also worked. With alcoholism dropping a few percentage points and sports entertainment up to 24%, health had climbed up to the high 70s. Obviously, I know with it being summer helps, but as we entered winter, health would only drop to a low of 73%. Or at least that's what I'm going to tell you. With some money in the bank, it was time to expand our industry. At the end of last video, I said it would be a good idea to start producing our own consumer goods, so we could move away from spending thousands on importing our citizens' needs. So, it was time to set up some glorious Siberian distilleries that will produce only the highest quality of vodka for our comrades. But, to make it a little bit more of a challenge, we're going to try and build them using our own construction industry. As I noticed a lot of comments in the last video complaining that I didn't play the game properly because I wasn't playing on realism. Well, you can caress my big toe for all I care, but if you really want me to do it, like the video. And if it hits an arbitrary number, I'll do it. At the start, your construction industry is slow, inefficient, and your workforce is highly unmotivated. From what I've gathered, the two most expensive parts of construction are steel and labor, two things we currently have plenty of. The rest of the goods we'll have to pick up from the border. However, there were a few things we could produce ourselves. First was bricks because we had an abundance of coal, wood because that's fairly simple, and finally, gravel and concrete. For gravel, we could build a mine, processing plant, and all the other jazz that goes with it, but I really didn't want to do that. So instead, I'm going to build another waste facility. I know I literally just ripped down the old one, but hey, this time, I'm going to build it properly. By building it next to the dump, we were still going to export a majority of our waste, but we'd have a small trickle being fed through to the separation plant, then into the gravel recycling plant, and finally, into the concrete plant, ticking off another couple of goods. With that set up, I began construction of a warehouse which will feed into a couple of distilleries. These poor bastards were out here doing construction while it was minus 32 degrees, and that is the kind of dedication to the cause I like to see. During construction, the price of coal increased to a massive 17 rubles apiece. Since coal is a key component in making steel, the price of steel went up as well. So immediately I halted all construction so we could export as much as possible during the peak, pushing our exports up to 127,000 rubles in a month. Once the prices had stabilized, my workers were sent back to construction and before long had finished the warehouse in a single distillery. To actually make alcohol, we needed water and crops. Now, because we're in the middle of fucking nowhere and a majority of the year it's below freezing, we weren't exactly in the ideal place to grow our own, so we're going to rely on importing them for the time being. To celebrate the grand opening of our distilleries, I knocked down our technical university and replaced it with a mega pub. Now all our workers can drink our glorious Siberian vodka, and knocking down that university was definitely not going to have any consequences later on. With things running smoothly, I began construction of a radio station, some more flats, and finally the most important thing, a secret police station. I'd noticed our workers' loyalty to the Republic was slowly dipping, even though I had spammed statues of our glorious leaders. So we needed a few fellas to remind them of how good they actually have it. Once the station was completed, to save on money, instead of buying them cars, I gave them horses. I'd figured it would be easier for them to blend in as an undercovered horse than being the only one in town with a car. And it's thinking like that, fellas, is why I'm in charge. And because it's my YouTube channel. Plus, I was saving as much money as possible because it was finally time to admit we needed a second district. I think we can all agree I had stacked as much housing as possible around this single station. So I laid the foundations down for our second district. Once again, I built the train station in the center, alongside a mega pub, a supermarket, a theater, a fancy residential area, and all the other crap to go along with it. I left my construction center to sort all this out so I could move on to building a second coal mine. My plan was to utilize this abandoned mine as it had a quality of 75%, and it was a real shame just having it sat here doing nothing. The plan was to build a small processing center which will feed into a power plant so we could produce our own electricity. Now, I'm not gonna lie, it wasn't going to win any awards for looking pretty, but after fiddling about for bloody ages trying to build this railway, it was gonna have to do. I would also like to point out I built all this using paid construction, and my nice stockpile of rubles had basically disintegrated. And once again, I was poor. But after solving a few teething problems, I hooked the plant up to the power grid, and behold, we had power. Like, our power, produced in our own region, using our own workers with our own coal. We were also exporting any excess back to the Union for not really a lot of money, but hey, the real saving was made in not having to import it. But we did have one small problem. We were overproducing coal by quite a lot. But fear not, my dear little comrades. I had a great idea. Boats. Admittedly, I was feeling a little lazy as I didn't want to build some wacky railway when I could quite easily export it via sea. Furthermore, this would allow me to do a little bit of trading with the West to build up a reserve of dollars. However, like I said, we were broke. So incredibly broke. Once I had managed to scrounge a few pennies to build both the harbor and the dock, I was expecting to buy a big old ship which we could use to export thousands of tons of coal at once. Unfortunately, we had this. Oh, let me just zoom in a little bit so you can see it. Costing 25,000 rubles and carrying a whopping 120 tons of coal, it can sail at a top speed of 4 knots. After it had finally arrived at the loading dock, Randy blessed us with a spike in the price of coal. This single load was going to make us $2,000. Oh, sorry, $2,026. One small problem though, it had to get there. It took about 10 minutes with the game running on full speed to leave, meaning by the time it finally got there, which was about a month in game, the price of coal had stabilized and we only made $1,500. A 25% decrease because this thing was so fucking slow. Oh, and then the dock set itself on fire. Brilliant. To make this work then, we needed more canal boats. So I spent the next few months buying more. I had purchased around 160,000 rubles worth of boat before I came to the conclusion that maybe this wasn't a good idea. So I finally decided to just bite the bullet and build a railway line so we can export to the Union. I still kept the canal boats running because those dollars were going to come in handy in the future, because I had another great idea on how I was going to make money. Oil. One of the many resources we had in abundance in glorious Siberia was oil. However, just exporting oil isn't very profitable, but if you refine it into fuel and bitumen, you can make some serious rubles. But I needed a few techs before I could build a refinery, so I got to work researching those while I placed down some pump jacks. I did have a couple of problems. To start with, building the pump jacks was really expensive. Secondly, and arguably more alarming, I had no smart people. It turns out, maybe knocking down the university to build a mega pub wasn't the best of ideas, as the amount of highly educated people dipped from a high of 800 all the way down to just under 400. Now, this wasn't just a problem when it came to research, it also meant that we didn't have enough staff for our schools, police stations, and hospitals, which might explain why a lot of people were dying. Oops. Now, we can't import expert workers, but they are really expensive, and I just wasted all my money building this. As you can imagine, the next winter was pretty rough, as I might have made some bureaucratic errors and ended up spending over 40k on importing coal just to keep my population from freezing. Even though we had a massive stockpile of it, I couldn't get the stuff to my heating plants quick enough, and we had to use the magic import button. So once again, we came out of winter broke and with a large chunk of our population dead. It also didn't help that during the peak, we were hit with an epidemic. Realistically, I should be spending the few rubles I made each month fixing our problems. Instead, I was spending it all on unbelievably expensive pipelines because mountains. Once I had finally researched refinery designs, I began using our own construction to build it because it was going to cost 170,000 rubles. I know last video I banged on about not building your industry close to your residential zones because of pollution, but fuck them, we don't have the money to do that. So the population of District 2 was just going to have to suffer. They might all die a horrible death, but at least I was going to be rich. Speaking of riches, sadly they were not to be this year, as the entirety of 1940 was basically spent building pipelines from here to here. Alongside building the pumping dock and harbour, I was hoping to have the refinery done, but I had only built around 40% of it. In even more alarming news, this was the first year we were down on exports, which would make sense as a majority of the steel was being consumed, but it's still sad to see. Fast forward to spring, and I'll be honest with you, the refinery was still nowhere near finished. The black gold miracle had been a fucking bane on my existence, but we had come this far and I was gonna finish it. While I sat around staring at the construction site, I came up with another one of those brilliant ideas. One of the problems I had been neglecting was the 500 workers I was going to need to fill the refinery. However, I was sitting on around $76,000, thanks to our humble coal trade with the West. Instead of costing us 3,500 rubles for 10 workers, we could instead spend $370 on uneducated, in poor health third world immigrants. Since it was going to take a couple of months to finish construction anyway, this would give us enough time to get them healed up and educated. By the time I had spent around $13,000, I had an additional 600 people ready to work in the refinery that was only 5% away from being finished. Finishing the construction with rubles, we finally could start producing the two things that were going to make us rich. Immediately, the refinery filled with my new workforce, our fuel tanks began to fill up, and we were ready to export our product. All I had to do now was buy a ship. What the fuck do you mean? It cost 516,000 rubles for a tanker. I guess we had some more waiting to do. So I waited, and waited, and waited, and waited a little more. In fact, I waited so long, I ran out of space on my computer. After mending that small skill issue, I checked the market to see it had gone up by another 10,000 rubles. After a small breakdown, 526,000? It keeps going up! Give me my ship, damn it! Give me what I want! Give me what I want. I just happened to check the second-hand boat market, only to find a tanker at the low cost of 308,000 rubles. Don't get me wrong, she was a little beat up, but it will do. Firing her out of port, I admired her beauty for a while before she arrived at the pumping dock. Finally, again, we were ready to export the oil and become filthy rich. Two problems though. First, fuel was at its lowest price even though it's 1942. And second, we couldn't export both products at the same time. But it's fine. I loaded her up with bitumen, and once she arrived at the Union, the money began to pour in. I began spending the cash on expanding our housing, amenities for our population, and importing intelligent people to run our hospitals and radio station. Their job was to deliver the message of how glorious our republic had become thanks to our black gold. Health had increased, happiness increased, and our population skyrocketed to over 10,000 people. But the thing that mattered the most to me was we had reversed the downward trajectory of our exports. In fact, we absolutely smashed them. With over 2 million in exports, I think we had made Comrade Stalin proud. Furthermore, births were up, deaths were down, and overall I feel like by the end of 1942, we had actually created somewhere that wasn't horrendous to live. Shame it cost 20,000 lives to build it. With another 5-year plan completed, which may have taken 7 years, I think we were done here. I just want to say thank you all for watching. Thanks to the people who send money at me, and if you enjoyed, please give it a like. And as always, new videos this year?